Hey everyone, welcome back to Masonzero MTG. Modern Horizons 3 is here, and this type of set is one of my absolute favorites. I love the new and unique card designs, the mashups of familiar cards and mechanics, and the powerful cube staples that will inevitably emerge. This one is no different, offering some awesome new cards and good reprints of course, that cubers will love. As always, I try to make this list with a lot of different power levels in mind, so some of these will do best in powered cubes, while others will be good in peasant cubes, or lower powered cubes, or synergy cubes. And outside of these 10 cards I'm talking about, there really is something for everyone here. There's so many great cards, and I'm not going to talk about all of them. Ocelot Pride is basically the Ragavan of white. Okay, so it's not quite that powerful, but it's definitely one of the highlights of this set, all for 1 mana. A 1/1 with First Strike and Lifelink is a pretty good base, but it also has a great life gain and go wide ability. On your end step, if you gained life this turn, you make a 1/1 token. If you have the City's Blessing, you then copy every token that entered under your control this turn. This therefore serves a similar role to Anointed Procession. The upsides are the lower cost, and the fact that it's a proactive creature instead of an enchantment. The downsides are that you need 10 permanents, although that's not super hard, especially in a go-wide deck, and that creatures are often easy targets for removal or counters, and it might get killed before you even do anything. Overall though, I think this card is a great inclusion in your cube for aggro and go-wide decks, but it's good enough that I think a mid-range or control deck wouldn't hate running this if they did need another playable card. While Strix Serenade is definitely a riff off of Swan Song, this new counterspell manages to be even more relevant for cubes specifically. For 1 mana and giving your opponent a 2/2 flying token, you get to counter an artifact, creature, or planeswalker spell. This is obviously more powerful in cubes that focus on creatures, and maybe less so in powered cubes, although you still have powerful mana artifacts that you might want to counter. But I think it's safe to say that most cubes are going to have creature-based decks. Now the other side of this coin is that giving an opponent a 2/2 with evasion in exchange for a 1 or 2 drop is not ideal, and if you expect it to get played early in the game like this, then Stern Scolding is probably just better. Preventing a Ragavan is good of course, but a 2/2 with flying still isn't nothing. A 2/2 flyer is a lot more dangerous in a 1v1 20 life game as compared to Commander where Swan Song sees the most play. And if you're trying to prevent an aggro deck from coming in hot, you still manage to give them a creature. It will be interesting to see how this card performs and if it's actually good or not, but I'm feeling pretty positive. As if red needs any more amazing 2-drops. I feel like in all of these videos I talk about a cool new red 2-drop, and great, here's another one. Reckless Pyrosurfer is another fantastic contender for this slot. A 2/2 for 2 with haste is already a pretty solid body, but then it has Landfall. Whenever a land enters under your control, it gains Battlecry, which essentially translates to other attacking creatures get +1/+0 for each land you play. This is most powerful in a cube with fetch lands of some kind, but it's pretty good in general. But of course this needs lands in order to be at its best, and an aggro deck might not hit land drops every turn after the first 3 or 4. The big advantage to this card is having haste, as both a Quarter Paladin and Goblin War Driver already offer a guaranteed Battlecry trigger for 2 mana, but without the haste. And Rosnacht and Signal Pest also give this ability for 1 mana, but with bad stats. So you have options, and Reckless Pyrosurfer isn't an auto-include, but I think it's definitely worth thinking about. This next one is a bit of a cheat, as it's actually an entire cycle and not a single card. The Flares are 3 mana and 4 mana instants and sorceries that have an effect that's pretty typical for its color. But if you sacrifice a non-token creature of its color, you can cast it for free. Free spells are often quite powerful, and sacrificing a creature is a small price to pay. Flare of Fortitude is one of the least useful, but it's definitely still something like a Teferi's Protection or Heroic Intervention type of card, but I think in many cases you would rather just run either of those in your queue instead. Flare of Denial is a cancel at worst and a free hard counter at best. Definitely strong, but blue may have a hard time sacrificing a non-token creature out of all the colors here. Flare of Malice makes an opponent sacrifice a creature or planeswalker with the greatest mana value, and black is probably the best color to be sacrificing creatures in, but this effect is pretty underwhelming with so much good cheap removal out there already. Flare of Duplication is for sure one of the best ones, as it can copy a spell. One of the hardest parts about fork and copy effects is keeping the required mana up. Obviously top decking this sucks, but it's a great way to counter a counter in a pinch, and will just be overall useful in decks that can balance spells and creatures. And finally, Flare of Cultivation is just a cultivate. I can definitely see this card being cast by sacrificing a mana dork and having a pretty explosive first few turns. I think if free spells is something you're okay with, this entire cycle is definitely worth looking at. Yo dog, I heard you liked mana in your mana. Fanatic of Ronus is a 2-mana 1/4 that taps to add a green mana. I would say that 1 mana for 3 extra toughness over Llanowar Elves is pretty worth it. This thing can block super effectively, especially in the first few turns of the game. But on top of that, Fanatic of Ronus taps for 4 green mana if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. So once you get going, you will be seriously ramping out into your giant bombs. But it's also not necessarily a win more effect, because for 4 mana you can eternalize it, exiling the card from your graveyard to make a 4/4 token copy of it, thus enabling itself. You can of course do this after it dies, but it can also be from milling or discarding. It's always nice to have a card that doesn't mind being in the graveyard, and that extra flexibility really pushes it over the edge of being playable. If you have any sort of blink theme in your cube, you might want to be playing Philia Exuberant Shepherd. And you might want to be playing them anyways because oh my god, this card's adorable. This 2/2 for 2 blinks any non-land permanent on attack and returns it at the end step. This is great for removing a blocker, but if you flicker your own thing, Philia gets a +1/+1 counter. Oh, and it has flash too. Overall, pretty solid for blink. Horizon of Progress is a weird little land. The first line is Reflecting Pool with some mana confluence added in. The second line is like Terrain Generator, except for 1 more mana, you can put any land into play rather than just a basic. The last line is ripped straight from cards like Horizon Canopy, so you can sack it to draw a card. All of those cards are good in their own way, and here we have a land that has multiple of these qualities. Obviously it doesn't have built-in fixing despite all of those abilities, but I think it's a good card for a 2-color deck, as well as for any cube that has any sort of landfall, or a higher quantity of tapped lands that you would want to play as additional lands rather than your land drop. I think it does a lot for a single land, and it's probably worth playing. Psychic Frog is yet another cheap card with way too much text on it. This might become a new blue-black cube staple due to its flexibility and power. It's a 2-mana 1/2 that draws a card when it deals damage to a player or planeswalker. That is actually pretty unique to also trigger on damaging a planeswalker, and Silent Submersible is actually the only other card that does that as far as I can tell. Otherwise, you can also discard a card to put a +1/+1 counter on the frog, then you can exile 3 cards from your graveyard to give the frog flying whenever you want. This card is definitely reminiscent of Shadow Mage Infiltrator, an old classic, but is way stronger. I think this can comfortably slot in alongside Dimir staples like Baleful Strix and Fallen Shinobi in a lot of cubes. Alright, what the hell is this? Emperor of Bones is a 2-mana 2/2, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can exile a card from any graveyard. It then has Adapt 2 for just 2 mana, and whenever +1/+1 counters are placed on it, you get to put a creature card exiled with it into play with haste and sacrifice it at the end of the turn. Absolutely crazy. Now in general, you can only do this once thanks to the way that Adapt works, but obviously there are more ways to make this happen. Draft a black-white deck with Luminarch Aspirant, and this becomes an insane combo that you can do almost as often as you want. I would love to see the opponent play Ragavan on turn 1 and you kill it with a Fatal Push or a Cut Down before attacks. Then turn 2, play the Emperor and exile Ragavan. Then turn 3, activate the adaptability and attack with both Ragavan and a 4/4 Emperor of Bones, with the potential of casting your opponent's spell on top of that. I think this is a great contender for a lot of cubes, and even the floor is pretty high. 2/4 for 3 with Reach. Mill 3 cards and put a land from among them into your hand whenever you attack. Non-land permanents in your graveyard have Retrace. In short, 6 is a really cool card. This is a great addition to a graveyard deck and is just a value engine in general. I know Eternal Witness is outclassed in a lot of cubes these days already, but I think in most cases you would rather have 6. Self-mill and land recursion are great in decks that care about those things, and a 4 toughness reach creature will block a lot of flyers for a while, although you really only get to choose one of those modes per turn cycle. Truly a great card though, and I think cubes that care about the graveyard at all will love it. Obviously in super fast cubes it might be a little bit slow, but I think if you have decks that are trying to grind out a longer game, this is definitely going to provide a lot of value. I wish I could talk about every single card in this set, but it's just not that kind of video. Just know that there are literally dozens of other cards in Modern Horizons 3 that are extremely queuable, across a wide variety of power levels of cubes. I picked these 10 because I think they cover a wide spread of power levels and styles of card. If there are other cards that you have your eyes on, and I know there are plenty, let me know in the comments which ones you're most excited about. Maybe give me your top 5. Anyways, I'll see you in the next Magic video, so be sure to subscribe if you want to see it. And in the meantime, check out these other videos that I think you should watch.